You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhalm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy, and we did something.
We did something amazing! Woo woo!
So this is a long-time project that I've been working on for a number of years. It took a number of people to finally see something through to fruition. So I'm going to interchangeably say I did things, but I usually mean we did things in getting to this final arrival process. But at our most recent California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists board meeting, the organization, the board, approved a statement on paying associates as a best practice of supervision.
Yes.
Gonna hit some highlights here. We will include the full text of this statement on our show notes. You can find those at mtsgpodcast.com. But this statement calls on employers to pay associates as a best practice of supervision.
And just to clarify, this is pre-licensed associates. I know there's different titles in different states, but in California, recently they got changed from interns to associates. So we're talking about folks between the graduation of their grad school prior to licensure.
And what the statement highlights is that the lack of pay at a financially vulnerable time in a therapist development creates barriers to entry into the workforce and decreases the potential diversity into our profession. That what successful employers do is offer competitive wages and benefit packages, meaningful work, appropriate infrastructure, and what this does is reduces staff turnover and improves outcomes for clients. And when people are put into unpaid positions, that it impacts their ability to get better paying jobs after they become licensed and provides them with protections in things like Equal Opportunity Employment, Civil Rights Act, and California Family and Medical Leave Act that unpaid positions don't provide those same protections for. And on a personal level, what this does is it lowers burnout for people who are getting paid as opposed to people who need to take on extra jobs. And what CAMFT is doing in this is they're calling on people with associate pre-licensed therapists as a best practice to pay people a living wage. And all of this is backed by a number of different research articles. You can see this in the statement that CAMFT is releasing, but this is not something that came quickly.
Nope.
This is, something that I'm super proud of getting here because for me personally, this started several years ago, even after I got licensed, but really in looking at the landscape of what our profession is and the underpayment or the non-payment of associates being a really huge barrier to people getting into this profession was something that I wanted to set out and change. And I did this in a number of my own ways with really not a whole lot of success. And one of the workshops that I've put on for a number of years is laws and ethics of having a private practice supervisee, and talking about how paying them is a legal obligation, especially in for-profit business models, but even in a lot of non-profit business models. And I am not a employment attorney whatsoever, but I saw the number of abuses that were happening in the field. And so I started putting out this supervision workshop as a continuing education. And I'd get a number of different responses from people of saying, well, I wasn't paid. Why should I pay other people to work for me? And I said, well, because that's what the law says, is that you're supposed to pay them. And as I continued to move further and further into my career, getting involved in more and more therapist-facing organizations, I started bringing up these points at bigger and bigger meetings of gatherings of agency directors and saying, hey, this might really be something that we need to look at. And this really started to come to a head around the time of the lawsuits around when the PAs working on the movie Black Swan successfully proved that they weren't just working as interns on the movie set, but were actually doing employment-based things. And it started to kind of revolutionize what was going on in Hollywood at the time and gearing up some of the employee rights for people who are put into these positions for quote unquote experience.
Yep.
When they're actually doing jobs. And so it started to tip a little bit of these conversations a little bit more into avenues into our field. And since I was really one of the only people in the room, I wasn't the only one, but one of the only people in the room really sticking my neck out there for this to happen, I often got shut down just by the sheer volume of other people saying, well, if we have to pay people, then we're going to have to close our doors, and that's just going to create these barriers to clients getting services, and it's all about the clients. And I'd respond back with something heroic, like, we can't take care of one impoverished population by taking advantage of another impoverished population to provide services to them. And I finally was able to partner up with another CAMFT board member to create a proposal earlier this year. We said we really want CAMFT to make a statement around being able to pay associates just as a best practice. We understand not everybody's going to be able to do this, but whatever training that your agency might provide, whatever good supervision that you might be able to provide, paying people is an even better way of doing on top of everything else that you're already doing. So CAMFT said, yeah, go ahead and make a statement. And we crafted up some ideas. We ran it through a couple of different committees. We got some feedback. We added some different pieces to this. And that's where we came up with this statement that finally got approved. And I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, to me, I was on the task force with you and looking at the research, and I was just impressed by how well this is actually understood. There's research that we were looking at that was from SAMHSA around trauma-informed workplaces. And when you look at what they're describing as top workplaces, it's everything everybody wants, and it's founded in research, and it's real, and actually putting all this stuff into context and understanding how this impacts our profession, and looking at even employment at a larger scale, and understanding that when people do unpaid internships in general, sometimes that actually sets them back versus not having an internship at all. Like, I was just looking at all this stuff and going, we have set up our pre-licensed individuals for a really hard time in making up the wage gap that is really hindering our profession and making it very hard for people who are choosing this as their livelihood and who don't have, the wealthy partner, or, I think there's somebody in our local meeting that jokes that, she's, independently wealthy, so she's doing a sliding scale. Like, there's jokes that there is this other financial source that helps people get through this, but many of us in the field don't have that privilege. And it means that we are not able to actually make it through to licensure. So being a part of this and really having you, Curt, kind of ring the bell and make sure that we keep moving forward on it has been really rewarding. I have to be honest, it was something that shocked me when I entered the private practice arena, because I was paid from the time almost from the time I graduated. And so to me, and a decent salary and benefits and all of those kinds of things. And so when I started seeing the abuses, when I started seeing people that were paying to work for somebody, I was really shocked. And I know that there are different laws in different states, but some of these things are happening in California, where arguably there are huge worker protections, and things have moved very dramatically towards helping people to get paid for the work that they do and have, appropriate benefits and stuff. But I think, to me, the fact that in California you were getting pushback around, I have to pay them at least minimum wage, or, because I sat in one of those workshops and it was an excellent workshop, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to be a supervisor right now. I don't have the infrastructure to really do what should be done. I can't do the best practices, so I'm gonna wait a bit. But to me, it seems shocking, even in California, where there is such a push towards employee rights and worker rights, that there's so many people who are either blatantly breaking the law or skirting it or finding loopholes to have clinicians, and especially our pre-licensed clinicians who are oftentimes, I think, taken advantage of, be in these situations where they're not getting paid and just burning through their resources, if they have any, to try to make it to licensure. So to me, I'm very proud of the work that I was able to help with and that you've done and here. And I think it speaks to a larger message, which is you started with a singular voice in a room and you got a lot of pushback. And then you grabbed a few extra voices, maybe here and there, and put yourself in a position where you had the ability to make an impact. And I think, to me, I mean, that's what we're talking about here is as modern therapists, one of the things that we do is to protect the profession, to improve the profession, and, kind of putting our money where our mouth is and actually having something momentous occur, I think is really important to acknowledge. So thanks, Curt.
I don't know what to say to that, because it's awesome to see this piece of it come to fruition and knowing how much work came this far, but also understanding that this is one of many pieces that need to change. Mm-hmm. Because some of the arguments that I've heard, and some of you may even be having some of these thoughts now, is, well, what about licensed people? They need to get paid more too. That we're chronically underpaid as a profession based on the amount of investment to get where it is. And I'm really taking this as an approach of a rising tide raises all boats. Mm-hmm. And that as long as there is a potentially free labor force that can be taken advantage of, that artificially deflates what the rest of us can get paid. And so this is one piece. And mm-hmm. I guess my energy in this is a call to action to all of you, in that we need to continue to raise this. I mean, CAMFT is one organization out of many, that we need to start pressuring the other organizations to reflect this same value. Because once we start getting NASW and ACA and APA and all of the other alphabet organizations to really take a look at how we treat ourselves and those coming developing into our field, that then allows for the people who are licensed to be able to make the same stand for themselves. But as long as there's that labor force that can be taken advantage of, people will take advantage of it.
For sure.
So, call to action. Take CAMFT's statement to your organizations and say, we need to do this too. B, this is also something where I'm happy that this piece of it got passed, but this is, a real feel-good sort of energy, but there's no requirement behind it.
That's just what I was thinking. I think there's conversations I've been in, and it's not exactly the same, but I'm going to tie it together, is this notion that there are laws that protect workers, there are policies, there are statements, there are best practices. And I think regardless of what happens in those situations, there are always going to be quote unquote bad actors, people who don't follow the law, don't follow the best practices. And it could be with the best intentions. They think that, well, this is how I did it, and I got great training, and so this is what I'm providing, and it's, and the visibility or the hours or whatever it is are worth what I'm offering, or feeling overwhelmed and I can't do anything but what I'm doing, and so I'm going to keep acting in the way I'm acting, even though I know that I'm not treating my employees or contract, whatever it is, well, this is what I can do, and this is how I'm going to give back to the world. And I think, to me, the other piece of it is kind of the accountability and the implementation. And and to clarify, in this moment going forward, we're not speaking as board members of CAMFT.
No, we're not.
Now we are now officially, taking the CAMFT hat off and talking about things more broadly, because I don't know that CAMFT has any specific plans with this statement. So, or whatever. So
I'm fairly certain that they just want me to go away.
I don't know that that's the case, Curt. I want you to stay. But I think the piece that I'm looking at is that there are the things that are best practices, that are the things that are the laws, and there's what's done. And I think there is an importance to have the best practices and the laws state what are best practices and what are, I understand that there's stuff that was legal that's horrible. So I'm not saying that, but I think if we can make sure that the laws reflect best practices as closely as they can, that the best practices are research backed and do support our workers and our profession, I think that's the starting point. I think there's also trying to shape and impact what is done. I know that there is a lot that Ben Caldwell talks about, kind of with individual kind of activism around if you've been hurt in one of these systems by a bad actor, that you make complaints and you do these things, and there's benefit to that, and there's also struggles to that, and so that's something where I'm just going to touch it and leave that alone for a second. But I think there's also the ways that we shape behavior around us by what we do, not necessarily kind of making these big complaints, but in what jobs we take and what boundaries we set while we're in those workplaces, and how we speak up within those workplaces and try to create change within those workplaces. And this can happen at any stage. You can do this as a pre-licensed associate, or you can do this as a manager. You can say, hey, we need to treat our employees better, whatever that is. But I think being able to understand what best practices are is really the first important step. But I think being able to identify, how do you shape these things? How do you share this knowledge? Because there are folks who don't know that in California, pre-licensed individuals have to be employees. And in fact, most therapists have to be employees in California. There are folks that don't know that, and they're acting in what they know. There's education, there's accountability, there's speaking out. And so to me, like what you're saying, it's important to have these statements and to have these calls to action, but I think they also need to then deepen into how do we interact as professionals at the different stages of our careers around this knowledge.
Amongst the many conversations that I've had surrounding getting this to where it is, there's so much of the bad actors, not inherently bad people, but people wanting to skirt what the rules are in order to fulfill their own missions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that does come at the cost of one group of people for another. And this is really something where Katie and I have agreed in principle on raising the wages for pre-licensees from the conception of what we've done.
Yes.
And it hasn't been frequent, but pulling back the curtain a little bit, we've edited out guests before who have talked about giving free clients to their pre-licensees in order to fulfill their missions.
Yeah.
And this is something where this really does take a lot of consistency in speaking out for your principles to be able to really keep a cohesive message in order to keep the good actors good, to bring the people who are in the middle to the good side. And it's really something where, again, coming back to, this is just one piece of many. There's a number of people who do need to get paid better. There's government contracts that need to be paid better. There's insurance companies that bring a whole antitrust aspect of being able to raise reimbursement rates. There's opening up job opportunities to licenses that are excluded for some stupid reason or
Very
another.
Stupid reasons.
That all of this needs to continue to build on, but you're going to face people, even entrenched in the system, just like we have over the last few years, who really want to keep the system where it's at, that they have an investment into where things are. And this becomes a very frustrating piece of not having our field change with the way that the world is working. And I imagine as this statement gets released more publicly that some of the conversations that we've had are going to get voiced again. And some of these really come down to, well, what do I do with my associates if I have to pay them? I'm just going to fire them. I'm just going to, close my doors. And, these clients that aren't being served, this is your fault. But it reminds me of this essay that I read at the end of the Civil War, when some of the plantation owners in the South kept asking, yes, but who's going to pay us for our property that's now free?
Oh, gee. Oh, man.
And, this really comes to where I inherently believe that most therapists are good people.
Mm-hmm.
And they do good things most of the time. But that doesn't excuse the systemic abuses that can happen. And this is something where changing the system takes time. And, this took me several years at this point to get to this point. And this might be something where I hope that all of you are going out and you're going to take this and help to just, continue to help the dominoes fall for this in your own organizations, in your own states, wherever it might be. But this is where systemic change takes time and energy and consistency and a whole lot of help.
There's one point I want to make that I think is important to recognize as well. We are each individuals with our own perspectives. And while Curt and I agree on a lot of things, we don't agree on every piece of some of these things. And yet we still both stand up and speak. We still both stand up and pursue what we feel is best, and look to see what the research says and look to see how systems are operating, and we move forward together, whether it's in lockstep or with nuance or with abject,
abject hostility.
Mostly not the hostility, but there's been some conversations that got a little heated. But I think it's something where even though we don't necessarily see everything in exactly the same way, and I would hope not, we're two different people, we still feel that it's important to speak up and make a difference where you can make a difference. And so to me, I just wanted to comment on that, because there are folks that may, be very excited about training programs where it is deep into, huge amounts of trainings and certifications and all of those things that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. And it's almost like going to school with a, experiential aspect to it. And they love that experience. They feel empowered by that experience. They can afford to do that experience, and they move forward. And we're not saying that those things are invalid. We're saying that being paid for the work that you do is a best practice. And wouldn't that be awesome if you could get paid and get trained?
Yeah, your landlord isn't going to accept that piece of paper that the certificate is written on in order to pay your rent next month.
No, that's very true. But I think it's something where we can have differences of opinions. We don't all have to agree in order to try to make a difference.
But you do have to agree on making change, leaving the profession a better place.
Yes.
And this is the importance of really working on the therapy movement. Mm-hmm. Is if you've been hanging out with Katie and me for as many episodes as you have, to really be able to make the changes that we're advocating for does take a significant amount of us in order to start to really shift things. Katie and I have served on the CAMFT Board of Directors for several years at this point. We've been involved in the organization for several years before that. It does take what's the word I'm looking for?
I was just thinking a lot of sitting in boring meetings.
It takes a lot of sitting in boring meetings, but a critical mass of people to really get some of these things off the ground. And in order to get to a critical mass, a lot of times it's standing out there alone. It's getting other people involved. And as I cycle off my term on the CAMFT Board of Directors, of that coming up in the next few months here, I feel that what I could do in the board role got accomplished.
Yay!
And there's a ton more that I can see of getting accomplished in that board role, but it's at the cost of some of the other things that I think can continue to further and build on statements like this, that can take this from a professional organization to now training programs, to agencies, to legislators, that is now getting the momentum of these first steps in place. And I think that that's really something where to be a modern therapist is maybe not necessarily agreeing with all of the steps or putting your energy into the same steps that we're doing that Katie's talking about, but it's coming around this idea of making the profession better for therapists. It's making the profession better for consumers of therapy. It's destigmatizing mental health. And we can spend a lot of time infighting about which intervention is the most effective across the most number of clients that doesn't do that.
Or which mindfulness practice needs to happen in this particular moment.
Mm-hmm. So this is personally, I've said this a number of times on this episode, but I would love for you to take this statement to your own organization, because that helps build this mission. That helps to raise all of the boats in our wage problem when it comes to the mental health workforce, and get your projects going too.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. My call to action is slightly different. I would love this to be national and international. I think if we could get this momentum on this type of a statement, I think it's amazing. I think there's some people that this is not their particular issue. You know, that's not their focus. And I don't want to dismiss that there are some places that maybe you who's listening right now needs to stand up on your own, or maybe there's a group that can come together and stand up and do these things. And our focus is the profession. And I think that's obviously where, you know, we're going to stay. But there are many things that as therapists we can stand up and do things about. And if you feel called to do that, you know, as therapists, we interact with society in all places. And so in improving the world, you're improving our profession too. So I'm going to give some people some permission to do their own thing. Is that okay, Curt?
Sure. So there's a couple of individuals that I want to thank who worked on this task force with us. Katie, obviously, Jeff Kashou, and Lisa Romain, both licensed marriage and family therapists in the Southern California area, helped to put some work into researching and crafting this statement. And I think are people who really helped to see this through to this part of this movement.
Yes. And Lisa really was the person that helped initiate this with you.
Right. And so I really appreciate them helping to move this forward and feel the need to recognize them as individuals. And for all of the people who raised different concerns along the way, made me go back and find the research, find the laws that helped make this be a really robust statement. This started 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago with, hey, we should pay people.
Yes.
Somebody should say that we should pay people.
Yes.
To now this really well crafted out idea of here's why, here's how much, here's how it impacts our clients, here's how it impacts the diversity and inclusiveness of our profession. And I'm really proud of what we've done. And I hope that this impacts people who come after us that don't have to face the idea of, wait, you mean it used to be that we would just like show up and volunteer our time and like provide these professional mental health services? Just like, you know, we actually gave money to be at these sites in order to give this very professional thing.
That's crazy. That was my impression when I found out about this. I was like, what? So let's have everyone's experience be like mine.
So go do stuff. Go see your project through. It takes time. It takes effort. But to really get to a place where I am. I can't share just how proud I am of what we've accomplished enough, and recognize that there's so many more of the next steps that I'm eager to now continue to build this on.
Yeah.
But
you've gotten a little teary. I've seen it.
Yeah. So we are taking off the next couple of weeks to kind of rest and recoup on our end. We'll be back in the new year. We're really excited with some of the things that we're going to bring to the podcast in the new year. We've loved the feedback that we've been getting from all of you, especially over the last couple of months. We're going to take some of your ideas and dive into some of these issues quite a bit deeper. But happy holidays to everyone. And you can find the show notes. You can find the statement at mtsgpodcast.com. And until next year, I'm Curt Widhalm with Katie Vernoy.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.